there are a lot of things that we eat today that contribute to leaky gut. Remember, the gut, it's the gut. What we put in the mouth matters, because what we put in the mouth impacts the GI tract. And so eating real food has to start the process of healing. And a lot of people can't get by with this. They don't understand. They can't wrap their mind around just eating real food. They have to have their processed cereals. They have to have their processed bread products or processed grain products, etc. And one of the reasons I wrote No Grain, No Pain was to kind of help break people free of that mindset. But you got to start by eating real food. Well, what is real food? Real food should not contain pesticides. It should not contain plasticizers, or it shouldn't be stored in plastics where those plastics are leaching. One of the worst places we see this is not even necessarily with food, but it's the way water is bottled in that plastic. And what happens, it's not so much that plastic is the bad part, it's whether or not the plastic has the capacity to leach into the food. So one of the things that happens is that food that's stored in plastic in the heat, okay, or if it's microwaved, or if it's heated up, or like in the case of water bottles sit in a big warehouse and the temperature gets hot. And so what happens is these plastics, they leach into what you're drinking and eating, and now you're being exposed to the plastics. And we know that, again, we know pesticides can contribute to leaky gut. The number of studies that show, and I'll have a link for this post-show follow-up. I'll have a very comprehensive link of research studies that you guys can go read and learn more about this. But we know that pesticides can alter the microbiome and contribute to leaky gut. We know plastics act as estrogens. Remember, we just said birth control pill. Remember, it's an estrogen. And so we know that these plastics and pesticides too are forms of xenoestrogens. If you've heard that term, xenoestrogen, chemical compounds that mimic estrogen that can have an estrogenic type effect. And so we know that these two fall within that category and can contribute to leaky gut. We know that genetically modified foods can be part of the problem. And there are different aspects to this. So in some regard, most of your GMOs are designed to be sprayed with more or extra pesticides. So the seed itself is designed to survive the pesticide when nothing else can survive it. And so maybe you're getting food to grow faster, right? But you're getting food that's loaded with more chemical, and these chemicals we know can create and contribute to a host of problems within the GI tract. As a matter of fact, if those of you have been watching the news, there was a recent lawsuit in California where the company, it's now Bayer that owns Monsanto at the time, Monsanto, the producer of glyphosate, where they lost the lawsuit, and it was proven, at least in this court case, that the pesticide glyphosate can contribute to intestinal cancer. So we talk about this is GMO too. So these two kind of go hand in hand, and we know intestinal cancers are highly inflammatory. Leaky gut's part and parcel. What happens before cancer is diagnosed, though? What kinds of damage and inflammatory changes exist by getting exposure to these slowly over time before the cancer actually develops? So we want to avoid these things. These aren't real food. These are industry's solution to produce more food at scale to feed more people, but not necessarily to feed people healthy, just to feed them so they don't starve to death. And I would say if you had no other option and it was starvation or eat something that wasn't the best for you, don't starve to death. But we have the option in our world today. We have the option to eat real food. We have the option to grow our own garden. We have the option to eat organically. So takes care of this list. We can get these out. And then we have food additives. Now, there are a number of things food additive-wise that have been shown or that have actually been researched to contribute to problems. And so some of those are the dyes that we find in food. And then we have the preservatives, a number of the different preservatives in food, and then a number of different things that are added to food for flavor, for texture. Okay, these food additives, these have all been shown in a number of research studies, and a lot of these studies were done on celiac patients. These studies show that celiac patients who consume foods that are high in these different derivatives and food additives generally tend not to heal as well, generally tend to have persistent continued villus atrophy and GI tract inflammation, versus celiac patients who go grain-free, who don't consume all this other nonsense. One of the big food additives, and they don't even have to list it on the label, is something called microbial transglutaminase, MTG. MTG, I've talked about this before, is also known as meat glue. And so meat glue is what is used to hold together hot dogs and sandwich meat. It's sometimes used to hold together what they're calling chicken breast or chicken nuggets. It can be used in imitation crab meat. It can be used in a number of other products because it's for mouthfeel. It's not just a glue itself, but it's also for mouthfeel. But we know there's a lot of really compelling research coming out that shows that this substance contributes to villus atrophy and damage of the GI tract lining. And then there's nanoparticles. We're now finding, there's not human studies yet, but a lot of foods with these nanoparticle type technologies, we're now finding in animal studies they cause permeation in the GI tracts and contribute to leaky gut. So be very, very cautious about nanoparticle additives as well. And then many foods contain heavy metals. Now, this doesn't necessarily, you can eat organic food that has heavy metals, and a perfect example of this could be rice, right? Rice, even organically, can have high quantities of things like cadmium, right? We know, for example, cadmium causes intestinal damage. It causes damage to the enterocyte. So a lot of people with celiac disease gravitate toward heavy rice loads, and they get a lot of cadmium that continues to potentially persistently damage their GI tracts. Other heavy metals, though, as well. And so many of these are found in food. We've seen food contaminated with lead, processed food from China contaminated with lead and other toxic heavy metals. So this is why when I say to heal a leaky gut, we absolutely have to start here. If we don't start here, all bets are off. We have to start with real food, because real food is going to not contain these different agents. And so at the very least, we know we're not consuming things that contribute to this problem. So if we start with real food, and that real food is something that we also know that we're not going to have a sensitivity or reaction against, then now we can knock out this segment, right? So eating real food that we're not reactive to, and then that leads to a scenario where maybe there's not the inflammation that leads to the problem, that leads to the diagnosis, that leads to the medication. So then we know that we don't have to worry about the medication-induced elements behind leaky gut, and we can cross out these three. So you can see why, when I say it has to start with real food, it has to start with real food, because if it doesn't, right here begins a process of continuance that leads to a perpetual status or state of leaky gut. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.